Chapter 11. As Rovol and Rizzo made their way to the physics lab at the start of their work period, they were joined by a lone airboat piloted by a white-bearded elder. The stranger introduced himself as Kassler, the first of mechanism, and warmly greeted Rovol. Rizzo was introduced to him, and Kassler praised Rovol for enabling the Norlaminian scientists to put into practice many theories that had been studied for cycles of time. Kassler then turned to Rovol and asked about the specific directional mechanism he required. Rovol explained that he needed controls 1,000,000 times more delicate than any he had constructed before. He had called upon Kassler's surpassing skill to help him achieve this task, as it was senseless for him to attempt it alone. They were planning to send out a fifth-order projection, something that none of their ancestors had ever dreamed of. With its incredible velocity, they would be able to explore any region in the galaxy as quickly as they currently visited their closest sister planet. Kassler understood the precision required to hold upon a point at the galaxy's outermost edge. Kassler acknowledged the challenge as a problem worthy of any man's brain. He noted that the small circles Rizzo had thought precise were useless for this task. He would have to construct large and accurate circles and create slow and fast motions without creep, slip, play, or backlash. He would require a pure torque capable of being increased by infinitesimal increments. After pondering for a while, he continued, "No mechanical system can be built with enough precision, as there will always be some degree of freedom of movement. Therefore, we need a force that provides pure torque, and the only option is the 467th band of the Fourth Order. I'll have to develop that band. The director must have a full equatorial mounting with circles of 250 feet in diameter. Do we need a longer projector tube for proper design?" "That length will suffice," came the reply. "The mounting must rotate in both planes and counteract the irregular motion of our planet. We also need additional motions to rotate the mechanism on each graduated circle. I suggest making the outer supporting tube large to provide ample space for the inner projector tube. Dimensions X37, B42, J867 should work well." "Sounds good. You have a clear idea of the apparatus," the other person replied. "These things will take some time. When do you need the mechanism?" Kassler asked. "We have 2 periods of labor, or 3 if necessary," came the response. "Perfect. I was afraid you might need it today, which is impossible. The mounting will be prepared in the area of experiment. Farewell." As Kassler's flyer disappeared, Rizzo asked, "You're not building the final projector here?" "We'll build it here and transport it to the area, where its housing will be ready. All mechanisms of that type are set up there. The location is convenient, and we have all the necessary tools, equipment, and materials. Plus, the area of experiment is anchored to the planet's crust to avoid any vibration that could affect the direction of our beams of force, which must be very long." He closed the master switches and resumed work with his colleague. They finished the control panel, and Rovol plated a large copper cylinder and installed a new system of refractory relief points and ground rods. "We must lose only 0.001% of our total energy, and we need to dissipate it to avoid destroying the laboratory," he explained. "These air gap resistances are the simplest way to get rid of the wasted power," said one scientist to the other. "I understand, but what about when we take the thing into a spaceship? We collected some heavy charges on the Bismark, so heavy that I had to stop several times in the ionized layer of an atmosphere while they faded. This new equipment will use tons of copper, while the old ones only used ounces," replied the other scientist. "In the future spaceship, we will install converters to use all the energy, so we won't lose anything. However, these converters must be designed and built specifically for each installation, and they require a high degree of precision. It's not worth building them for a temporary mechanism like this one," explained the first scientist. The laboratory walls were opened, and ventilating blowers and refrigerating coils were set up everywhere, even in the tubular structure and behind the visiplates. After ensuring that everything flammable had been removed, the 2 scientists donned their helmets and goggles. Rovol then pressed a switch, and a hemisphere of flaming golden radiance surrounded the laboratory and extended for miles on all sides. "I understand most of what you've done so far, but why the light?" asked Rizzo. "It's a warning. This entire area will be filled with dangerous frequencies, and that light is a warning for all uninsulated people to stay away from our area of operations," replied Rovol. I see. What's next? Asked Rizzo. All we have to do now is take our lens and material and go, said Rovol, taking out the largest Phaedon that Rizzo had ever seen. Oh, that's what you're going to use. I've been wondering about that stuff. I took one back with me to Earth to experiment on, but I couldn't touch it. I couldn't even change its temperature. What is it? Asked Rizzo. It's not matter in the ordinary sense of the word. It's almost pure crystallized energy. You may have noticed that it looks transparent, but it's not. You can't see into its substance at all. The illusion of transparency is purely a surface phenomenon and unique to this substance. I've told you that the ether is a fourth-order substance. This is also a fourth-order substance, but it's crystalline, while the ether is probably fluid and amorphous. You could call this Phaedon crystallized ether without being too far off, explained Rovol. But it should weigh tons, and it's hardly heavier than air. Or wait a minute, gravitation is also a fourth-order phenomenon, so it might not weigh anything at all. But it would have a tremendous mass, wouldn't it? Or would it, not having protons? Crystallized ether would displace fluid ether, so it might— I give up. It's too complex for me, said Rizzo. The theory behind this material is quite complex, and I cannot fully explain it to you until you have knowledge of the fourth and fifth orders. Pure fourth-order material would have no weight or mass, but the crystals we have found are not completely pure. When they crystallized from the magma, they trapped enough particles of higher orders to give them the characteristics we have observed. However, the impurities are not significant enough to be affected by any ordinary reagent. But how could this material be formed? Asked the curious listener. It could only be formed in a colossal cosmic body, such as our green system, which was formed countless ages ago when all the mass existed as one massive sun. Imagine the conditions in the center of that sun. It has reached the maximum theoretical temperature of about 70 million centigrade degrees, and the electrons have been stripped from the protons, leaving a solid ball of neutronium that cannot be compressed further without destroying the protons themselves. The pressure continues to increase, but the temperature cannot increase any further. What happens then? Disruption, the listener replied. Exactly. During the instant of disruption, when unimaginable forces hurl suns, planets, and satellites millions of miles into space, the Phaedon is created. It can only be formed at the absolute maximum temperature and pressure that can exist only momentarily, even in the largest conceivable masses. But how can you make a lens out of it? It seems impossible to work with. It cannot be worked with in any ordinary way, but we will take this crystal into the depths of a white dwarf star, where the pressure and temperature are only slightly less than those that gave it birth. There, we can apply forces that will work it quite easily. I want to see that. Let's go, exclaimed the listener. They sat at the panels, and Rovol began to manipulate keys, levers, and dials. A complex structure of visible force, rods, beams, and flat areas of flaming scarlet energy appeared at the end of the telescope-like network. Why red? Asked the listener. To make them visible. We cannot work well with invisible tools, so I have imposed a colored light frequency upon the invisible frequencies of the forces. We can have an assortment of colors if you prefer, replied Rovol. As he spoke, each ray assumed a different color, and the end of the projector was almost lost beneath a riot of color. The structure of force, which Rizzo knew was the secondary projector, swung around as if sentient, and a lurid green ray extended itself, picked up the Phaedon, and hurled the jewel 1,000 yards out through the open side of the laboratory. Rovol adjusted more controls, and the structure realigned itself, perfectly in line with the tube and carrying the Phaedon on its end, 1,000 yards beyond the laboratory roof. We're ready to start our projection. Make sure your suit and goggles are secure. We need to see what we're doing, so the light rays must be heterodyned onto our carrier wave. This means the laboratory and its surroundings will be flooded with dangerous frequencies from the sun we're visiting, as well as from our own generators. Got it, boss. Everything's secure here. You said it's 10 light-years to that star. How long will it take us to get there? About 10 minutes. We could travel that distance in less than 10 seconds if we didn't have to take the Phaedon with us. Even though it's lightweight, it will require a lot of energy to accelerate. Our projections, on the other hand, have no mass and will only need the energy of propagation. Rovol flicked a finger, and a massive pair of switches clicked into place. Rizzo, seated at his control board and staring at his visiplate, was amazed to find that he seemed to have a dual personality. He knew he was sitting still in the operator's chair and the primary projector, firmly anchored to the ground. But when he looked at the visor plate, he felt like he was hurtling through space at a speed that made the Bismarck's best effort seem like a crawl. When he swung his controls to look backward, he gasped at the sight of the green system, barely visible as a faint star. Looking forward again, he saw a bright white star that seemed to have broken away from the fixed firmament, and was now so close to the force structure he was in that it was already visible to the naked eye. As they got closer, the violet-white light became so intense that they had to layer protective goggles over their eyes. Falling at an unimaginable velocity into the incandescent inferno of a white dwarf star, they witnessed a sight that no human had ever seen before. They saw solar prominences shooting hundreds of thousands of miles into space, and directly in their path was an enormous sunspot, a combination of volcanic eruption and cyclonic storm in a gaseous, liquid medium of blinding incandescence. "Shouldn't we avoid that spot, boss? It might generate interfering fourth-order frequencies," Rizzo cried. The generator was undoubtedly producing fourth-order rays, but nothing could interfere with their control over every component of the beam from Norlamin. Rizzo held on tight as they hurtled through the blazing photosphere and into the unknown depths of the scorching star. Through his protective goggles, Rizzo could see the force structure surrounding them and the Phaedon, transparent like diamonds in water. As they slowed down, the material around them thickened and became more opaque, and the Phaedon drew closer until it touched the projector. Eddy currents and striae appeared in the mass as their progress slowed. "What's wrong? Something's not working?" asked Rizzo. "No, everything is working perfectly. The material is becoming so dense that it's becoming opaque to fourth-order rays, so we're partially displacing the medium instead of moving through it without friction. When the fourth-order rays can no longer carry the heterodyned light waves without distortion, we'll stop automatically. At that point, the material will have the required density to refract the fifth-order rays to the correct degree," replied Rovol. "How can our foundations handle it? This stuff must be 100 times denser than platinum, and we must be pushing a massive load through it," said Rizzo. "We're not exerting any force on our foundations or Norlamin. The force is transmitted without loss from the power plant in our laboratory to the secondary projector inside the star, where it's liberated in the correct band to pull us through the mass, using all the mass ahead of us as anchorage. When we want to return, we'll simply change the pull into a push. We're at a standstill now. This is the most critical moment of the project," explained Rovol. All motion ceased, and Rizzo could barely see the Phaedon in front of him. The force structure slowly warped around until it held the Phaedon like a vice. Rovol pressed a lever, and 4 enormous plunger switches in the laboratory drove home. A plane of pure energy bisected the Phaedon, and 10 gigantic beams rapidly molded 2 sections of a perfectly shaped hollow lens. The 2 sections were brought together by the closing of the vice's jaws, their edges perfectly aligned. Instantly, the plane and the beams of energy transformed into 2 opposing tubes of force, whose edges coincided with the seam between the 2 halves of the lens. As if a welding arc had been amplified to the nth degree, 2 immense and irresistible forces collided in perfect opposition. The resulting meeting was so violent that seismic activity shook the entire mass of the dense violet-white star. Unprecedented sunspots appeared. Prominences erupted to hundreds of times their normal distances, and although the 2 scientists deep in the core of the tormented star were unaware of what was happening upon its surface, convulsion after titanic convulsion racked the mighty globe, and enormous masses of molten and gaseous material were riven from it and hurled far out into space. These masses would eventually become planets of that youthful and turbulent star. Rizzo felt his air supply grow hot, then suddenly icy cold. He knew that Rovol had activated the refrigerator system. Rizzo turned away from the fascinating welding operation for a quick look around the laboratory. He realized the vast knowledge of Rovol and understood the reason for the new system of relief points and ground rods, as well as the necessity for the all-embracing scheme of refrigeration. Even through his practically opaque goggles, he could see that the laboratory was one mass of genuine lightning. Not only from the relief points, but from every metallic corner and protuberance, Pent-up losses from the disintegrating bar were hurling themselves upon the flaring, blue-white, rapidly volatilizing ground rods. The very air of the room, renewed second by second though it was by the powerful blowers, was beginning to take on the pearly luster of the highly ionized corona. The bar was plainly visible, a scintillating demon of pure violet radiance. A momentary spasm of fear seized him as he saw how rapidly that great mass of copper was shrinking, fear that their power would be exhausted with their task still uncompleted. But the calculations of the aged physicist had been accurate. The lens was completed with some hundreds of pounds of copper to spare, and that geometrical form, with its precious content of semi-neutronium, was following the secondary projector back toward the green system. Rovol left his seat, discarded his armor, and signaled Rizzo to do the same. "I have to hand it to you, Ace. You sure are a blinding flash and a deafening report," Rizzo exclaimed, writhing out of his insulating suit. "I feel as though I've been pulled halfway through a knothole and riveted over on both ends. How big a lens did you make, anyway? Looked as though it would hold a couple of liters. Maybe 3. Its contents are almost exactly 3 liters. 7.5 million kilograms, say 8,000 tons. Some mass, I'd say, to put into a gallon jug. Of course, being inside the Phaedon, it won't have any weight, but it'll have all its full quota of inertia. That's why you're taking so long to bring it in, of course." "Yes, the projector will now bring it here into the laboratory without any further attention from us. The period of labor is about to end, and tomorrow we shall find the lens awaiting us when we arrive to begin work." "How about cooling it off?" "Its temperature was around 40 million degrees Celsius before you started working on it. But after your modifications, it was scorching hot," said the young chemist. "You're forgetting, my boy. The dense material is enclosed in an envelope that can withstand vibrations of up to the 5th order. You could touch it now without feeling any heat or cold," replied the aged physicist. "Ah, that's right. I noticed that I could take a Phaedon right out of an electric arc, and it wouldn't even be warm. I couldn't explain it then, but I see it now. So that material inside the lens will always remain as hot as it is. Incredible. Let's hope it never explodes," exclaimed the chemist. "Well, there's the bell. For once I'm ready to stop when the whistle blows," said the chemist as they walked out to their airboat.